Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear liners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you could pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Luke Boyce. He directed the upcoming film Revealer that just played at Panic Fest. Hi, Luke.
Hello.
We're so excited you're here.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited.
Man, I cannot wait to talk to you both about your movie and the movie you brought tonight. But before we do get to all that zaniness, let's go back to the very beginning. How did you get introduced to horror?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I grew up, as we'll find out, I grew up in a pretty evangelical household in the 80s. But my dad also was a artist and a graphic designer. So he couldn't help himself. He was like really into the visual arts, whatever that may be. And I remember when I was really little, so I was born in 82, but I remember watching, Michael Jackson's Thriller at a young age. And kind of because of our evangelical household, there were certain things that were sort of off limits, but I mean, I was kind of obsessed with monsters. I have drawings of just like I made up my own Universal Monsters school thing. Like I would draw these comic books and stuff of so I was aware of monsters, and I would watch a lot of old monster movies on TV. That was mostly where I got most of my horror education growing up. And then finally in high school, I kind of started, once I was a little bit more free, at a friend's house. I remember watching Joe Bob Monstervision had a Friday the 13th marathon, and I stayed up all night watching that with a friend. That kind of stuff. That kind of led me down that path to just really enjoying everything horror.
Yeah. Do you remember the first horror movie you ever saw?
Oh gosh. The first horror movie I ever saw. Probably. Okay, so I don't remember watching. I didn't see the movie, but I remember waiting for my mom. I have a very specific memory of waiting for my mom to get her hair done at the salon, and they had a TV, and seeing the commercial for Child's Play.
Oh.
And that traumatized me to the point where we had a My Buddy doll. Do you remember My Buddy?
My Buddy and Me. Yep, I
yes,
sure do.
Okay.
And Kid Sister. Kid sister.
Yeah. Child's Play hurt my brain pretty bad. And we had this My Buddy doll sat in our room and I just couldn't deal with it. Like for the longest time, I just was so afraid that it would come to life. And it got to the point where when I was really little, I just got so fed up with it being there that I just like, I in rage, I like drew all over its face and threw it in the attic just to get it out of there. And then I wouldn't go in the attic for years because he was up there and I was like, oh my God, my buddy is mad at me and he's going to try, if I even step foot in the attic at all, he's going to, come after me. So Child's Play. And I didn't watch the movie for the first time until like maybe 3 years ago.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah, but I binged the whole thing and I was like, oh my God, this is one of the best horror franchises of all time. Like consistent.
It's so good.
I think it's consistently across the movies one of the, best. So,
and constantly reinventing itself, which I love.
Just so creative and so interesting. So yeah, that I very much remember the Child's Play traumatization there for sure.
So I got to ask, since you've like binged all of the Child's Play movies, do you have a favorite?
I mean, I think I still like one. But I tend to gravitate towards original concepts, just sort of like where things come from. I think all of them are in some way really, really good. 3 is maybe my least favorite, maybe.
Yeah.
But I love 1, and I love just simple concepts. I love, just like whether it's that or whether it's Alien, anything that sort of spawns this franchise, but you can kind of go back to the beginning and just experience that simple idea and how well executed it is. So
yeah.
Cool.
Okay, cool.
And so you grew up pretty evangelical, you said. So did you ever did you ever read horror as a way to kind of sneak it into the house or anything like that? Was that something that you did a lot of as a kid?
We weren't allowed to. I remember.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and actually, so the interesting thing, so I remember my brothers would try to have Goosebumps and stuff like that, and my mom took them away, put them, like, we weren't allowed to have them, that kind of thing. And I don't want to misrepresent my parents here. I will say, like, they are not as, my mom is very progressive now and, things change and, it was an interesting time. We grew up in a very, very small town, 800 people population in my town. So very, very small, Midwestern.
Yep.
But I do remember, so my parents were basically, they kind of were new into the evangelical moment. The movie we're going to talk about was kind of important part of not necessarily the culture that they sort of adopted into, but it was new. They were new Christians for the most part. And they kind of bought into a lot of stuff. And I remember there was this book called Turmoil in the Toy Box. Have you ever heard of this?
The name is familiar.
No, but it sounds fucking horrifying.
You guys, you gotta check out, if you can get a copy of it. Oh, I highly recommend it. So it's like this. It was kind of promoted by Focus on the Family in the day, and the whole book is all about how all of these action figures and Saturday morning cartoons are basically gateways to Satanism. And my mom and dad had this book, and I remember looking through it, and the way that they would like they would have a picture of Yoda, and it was so scary. And I remember and they would do anything I actually, my parents, because of this book, when I was really little, they took my He-Man toys. I wasn't allowed to have He-Man as a kid. So I don't even have that nostalgic thing because they felt like it was going to lead me to Satanism.
Holy shit, I remember this cover.
I'm sure, yeah, it was pretty...
I remember this cover. This cover just brought me back to my childhood, seeing this book at a barn, not in a Barnes & Noble, or the Walden Books or B. Dalton's. Yeah. Because we're about the same age. I was born in 1981, so nice. We went probably through that whole era. Yep. And I remember seeing this book. I never read it, but I remember seeing it, and I did not know that that's what it was about.
Oh, a few years ago, my friends and I got a copy, and we're reading passages from it, and we just couldn't believe the stretches made in this book. But you know what? It fooled a bunch of people. Like I said, my parents. they got nervous, and I wasn't allowed to have He-Man, and they relaxed over the years, and I give my mom crap about it all the time.
Wow.
She hates it. She gets so embarrassed. But yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Satan's Toy Box.
wow.
I'm looking at the cover. It's incredible. They've got Satan's Toy Box,
Yes.
special edition. There's a second one as well.
And as a kid, like, that
Wow.
cover was like, you would look at it and you go, this looks awesome.
Uh-huh.
I know.
And you read it, but it's like,
I
yeah.
love like the knockoff Yoda on this, and the He-Man,
Yeah.
and the Barbie, and the,
So
and the
weird looking.
horrendous Cabbage Patch doll in the background. Oh wow, this is beautiful.
There's like Castle
It's so
Grayskulls in the
scary.
back.
Ooh,
And
Phil
the Teddy
Phillips.
Rex spin.
You know it's good when it's by Phil Phillips.
yeah.
Hey, you can buy it used from Amazon for $12. I might do that.
$12 feels steep, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
Over 135,000 copies in print, the book proudly proclaims.
Wow.
I think there was a sequel too. I'm pretty sure there was a sequel.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I kind of grew up. I mean, the Satanic Panic was, in my house basically.
Yep.
So
Well,
Yeah,
that
same.
will be very interesting to talk about, both with the movie you picked and in the movie that you, in fact,
Yes.
that you made. But I'm also curious, were you easily scared as a kid? Like, did things get to
yeah.
you pretty easily? Okay.
yeah. I mean, I've always hyper empathized. My imagination runs wild. So yeah. Oh yeah. I was super scared as a kid. I mean, I remember, so many different things. I remember, do you remember that movie Mask?
The
With Eric Stoltz and Cher?
Oh.
That's an incredible. I
remember
mean, I did not think you were going to say Eric Stoltz and Cher.
Right? Is that who it is? Is it
Yeah, 1985.
yeah, so I remember seeing this movie on I need to watch it again.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep, the picture is the guy. It's about the teenager with the skull deformity.
Yes, exactly. Gave me nightmares. I saw it on TV one time. Gave me nightmares for years because the makeup was. And now I mean, sensitive. It's a sad story, and I haven't watched the movie, but I need to rewatch it. But I remember as a kid just seeing, like, I would see different things on television, and it would just it would just bother.
Oh, Laura
bother
Dern
me for
was
a
in
long
it
time.
too.
Yeah, I see that. Like I remembered it when you asked me about this podcast. That came to my mind of things that really traumatized me as a kid, and I started looking it up. I was like, man, I gotta watch this movie. It actually looks really great. I didn't know it was directed by Peter Bogdanovich, and
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, when you said Mask, I was immediately thinking Jim Carrey, The Mask. Like that was immediately
not
going
Jim
towards-
Carrey The Mask. It's a great film. Do you remember that movie, The Adventures of Mark Twain?
Yes.
Yeah, that movie scared the living crap out of me. Will Vinton claymation movie. Oh my god! And that movie has some.
Was that the one where they go to hell at one point?
Yes,
And it's got like
yes.
they're on that little weird planet, and it's like, oh god, that is.
Yeah,
Yep. This is looking familiar. Yeah.
yeah. That movie is nightmare fuel. Even today, that movie is nightmare fuel.
Because I remember.
And that was the kids' movie.
Because I remember watching, I didn't watch the whole movie, but that clip, so I grew up, I was born in 93, so I grew up like
Okay.
with more like YouTube stuff, like YouTube was more a thing like for me when I was in high school, and this was one of the scene where they go onto the little planet was like in high school, we were all watching that and be like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is disgustingly terrifying. Like, what the hell? I'm like, this is scarier than any horror movie I've ever seen. This is for children.
Yeah,
The
Yes.
80s, man.
Like,
yeah. Well, we
crazy.
like my dad was like really like we watched whether if it was like puppets or claymation or any kind of interesting thing. Like we were always watching. My dad was actually. On the side, he was a ventriloquist and a magician, so he was just always like really into like all kinds of, just like alternative types of media. And so I remember us watching that a couple times, and just every time just scared the living
like,
crap
can
out
we
of me.
make another movie to watch, Dad?
Yeah.
Like, I don't like this.
Now it amazes me. It's his claymation was so cool, but it's still. I mean, there's some scenes in there that they'll get under your skin.
Wow.
Yeah. So. Okay, so then what were some other movies that you really loved as a kid growing up? When you started really watching horror and getting, more into it, you said it in high school, what were some of the movies you really enjoyed watching?
When I was a kid or in high school?
Well, I guess when you were able to get more access to horror and kind of started getting really into horror movies?
Yeah, well, I mean, and honestly, like, there were things, I mean, I think growing up in the 80s, like, a lot of content that was even geared towards kids was...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there were some scary things in it. I remember being 6 and just obsessed. I mean, it was my entire world for like a year was Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And the stuff at the end of that movie even is scary. I mean, by today's standards.
I can't wait for someone to come on and talk about that movie because I have traumatizing memories of seeing that movie as a kid.
There are scary things in it, and like I thought about talking about it, but I was like, but I loved it so much, even though there were parts of it that scared the crap out of me. Things like that. Like I was obsessed with The Last Crusade, even though I couldn't watch the end. There was always things like that. Like I loved a lot of those movies. I was obsessed with The Goonies as a kid and Back to the Future and a lot of those that are now cult staples I was obsessed with. I'm trying to think when like what horror like actual horror movie I was kind of first obsessed with. It's hard to say because I came into a lot of that late. I do remember really, this is kind of funny, really, really being into Hellraiser fairly early.
Wow.
Just because, which I don't think I could watch the whole thing, but I was so fascinated by the visuals. Just the design of it, the design work and and everything about that just really intrigued me to a point where I would watch it in bursts when it was on television. And I think it was probably heavily edited on television.
Probably, but
I do remember really being into that. I mean, Friday the 13th, we used to always, once we would watch those all the time, and every time there was a marathon. And I watched, I mean, really my horror came from like Monstervision. Like Joe Bob was like kind of my big gateway into horror. And he would just play anything. And I always have just loved old movies. So I was really into old horror. I mean, I remember by the time I was 14, I had seen the original Dracula like at least a dozen times. I had it on VHS, and so yeah. So
as an adult, what kind of draws you to the genre now?
Honestly, I think there's a lot of things that draw me to it. The first thing is just sort of the way horror unlocks visual potential. I think is one of the best things about it. I feel like it's one of the only genres that you can kind of really stretch the cinematic arts themselves, if that makes sense. Like, how do I kind of explain this? I feel like sometimes we kind of take for granted the idea that cinema just has all this potential, all this visual potential. It's a visual medium, and that's its primary, thing. So it's like, horror sometimes feels like the only thing that's unlocking that potential in a lot of ways. Like I remember I recently was watching Bram Stoker's Dracula with commentary.
Oh, the sexiest horror movie of all time.
Right? I'm just obsessed with it. I just think
obsessed.
I think the older it gets, the better it gets. It's just,
still need to watch it.
Aging like a fine.
Wait, you haven't seen it?
That's
every time you bring it up, I mention that I haven't seen it yet.
I think it literally leaves my brain every time because like it does not compute. Like it is so sexy. Anyway, sorry, it's one of my favorites. It's such a good movie.
and also just visually amazing. In the commentary, Coppola kind of talks about how his goal was to create a film with essentially that felt like it was of the time that Dracula is occurring, right? So he tried to use a lot of the techniques of silent film, and I'm a huge silent film geek. I actually think there's amazing things in silent film that we've kind of forgotten about. things that we have yet to really unlock in modern films that they did, because they had no choice but to tell a story visually.
Right.
And sometimes I think that modern film sort of forgets that, this is a visual medium. And, that's a film, for instance, that I think, if you listen to the commentary on Dracula, he really talks about the ways that they did all these incredible effects, specifically in the castle portion. And it just kind of will blow your mind. And nobody's really doing that anymore. Nobody's going to that place, except in a lot of cases horror, and especially in independent horror when you have no choice. I mean, even in our film, part of the kind of the fun part about it is to say, well, it's a horror movie. We kind of have to do these crazy things, but we have no money. We have to get creative. And, we have to do it well. So yeah, I think that's what draws me to it. It's just what it allows you to unlock in the medium itself, the medium of cinema that a lot of other genres don't.
So I know that you said that you got scared a lot as a kid. So two-part question. One, do you still get scared watching horror movies as an adult? And what was the last movie that truly scared you?
Oh man, I feel like I don't get scared that much. I've really gotten desensitized.
Yeah.
But I kind of think I watch horror movies now to try. I'm chasing that. I want to get scared. I feel like the last movie that honestly, that I can remember, I had a hard time sleeping that night was maybe, I want to say The Strangers.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good choice.
That movie, yeah, that really bothered me.
And I have 2 of the masks on my wall.
Oh God, nice.
I love that movie so much. It is
so good.
It's also one of the scariest movies of all time, in my opinion.
It is one of the scariest
movies of all time. It was still terrifying me.
100%.
I cannot watch it home alone, or I can, but I still will. I'm on I'm in a high rise, so it's not. But I'm always you never know. Who the fuck knows who weirdos are walking around in my apartment building?
Man, I refuse to watch it. When I first saw it, we would every year we did a horror marathon with my friends. So we would literally do a 2-day marathon, and everyone got to pick 2 horror films to watch, and we would just everyone would come in, and just from morning to late at night we would just watch movies. And that was one of the first ones we watched in our marathon. And even with a good 6 or 7 people there with me, I still had a really big problem with it. It was hard to recover from that one.
It's a spooky film. That's for sure.
It is so spooky.
Okay, so let's talk about Revealer. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what the film is about?
So Revealer takes place in 1987 Chicago, and it's about this stripper who's going to work, and every day she kind of has to deal with this annoying religious protester outside named Sally, who has kind of this league of this decency league trying to protest the indecency of her job. And they kind of spar a little bit, but this one particular day, the apocalypse actually happens. So it turns out that Angie, our main character, gets stuck in her peep show booth that day. And just so happens that Sally, the religious protester, has happened to sneak into the building for safety and is in the booth next to her. And so because Angie is literally stuck in the booth, she tries to convince Sally to help her get out. And they actually discover that underneath the building there were these bootlegger tunnels, which are actually is actually something in Chicago. And so they managed to rip the floorboards up and sneak into these underground tunnels, but the entire time something evil is chasing them.
Hell yeah. And the actress who plays Angie, is it Kato?
Kato, yeah.
Kato. She won Best Actress at Panic Fest this last weekend, and it's so well deserved. She's so good in it.
It's so exciting for Kato.
Yeah, we were thrilled. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, and there were some amazing films and performances at Panic Fest. So, that meant a lot to us that people enjoyed her performance. And it is amazing. I can't believe it.
She's so fucking funny in that movie. And I think when I first saw this movie, I was so impressed by the chemistry between Kato and, I'm so sorry, the woman who plays Sally.
Shayna.
Between Kato and Shayna, their chemistry is incredible. And I think, like, if they didn't have that chemistry, I don't think the movie would be, as believable. Believable is probably the wrong word here because it's the apocalypse. But, like, their chemistry makes it so... It really sells the movie to me. And I'm like, it was really cool to see how the two of them work so well together.
Yeah, and I didn't know when I cast them, I didn't know they knew each other. Until they got on set. Yeah, and it turns out that they were, and they weren't like super good friends at the time. They had worked together on a few things and they were friends, but they actually got really close on the set. And,
cool.
It was like, we filmed really early in the pandemic. Like, I think we wrote it in May 2020. And it was, so we were still in quarantine when we wrote this thing, and we knew we'd still be in quarantine when we made it. So, there was no real precedence, and we had to be really, really strict. So, the biggest fear we had when we made it was actors interacting.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, Kato and Shayna really created a really quick bond because they kind of were the only two who could really interact with each other as close as, as we do normally. So, and they're still they literally are like together all the time. They like text me constantly and they're so mean. They'll show me pictures of them being together and trying to make me jealous that they're hanging out and having great times. They're adorable. I love them to death.
So I have a question about the how you came up with the story, because I from what I understand, you kind of wrote the story, and then you also have writing it Tim Seeley and Michael Morrissey.
Yep.
Morrissey, and they are both comic book writers, and I think Tim Seeley is also a comic book artist. So how did this collaboration sort of come together, and how did the story get developed?
So me and Tim have been friends for a while, and we've been basically developing his comic Revival, which is one of my favorite comics of all time. And we've been kind of developing a revival project together. And that one required quite a bigger budget and a lot more. And we were just sort of, we were in a position where we really wanted to do something together. And Tim and I had always kind of talked about this idea, because we both grew up at kind of at similar times of the Satanic Panic. And we would joke about, what if we wrote a story like that the Satanic Panic was real? Like that everybody freaking out about it was actually, legitimately telling the truth. So that kind of transformed into this idea of how to we basically took that idea with the idea of, well, we were in a pandemic, and we were trying to figure out a way to make a movie where we could have limited interaction between our characters. And so Tim kind of came up with this idea. It's like, well, what if they're stuck in a peep show booth? No, we haven't seen that before. I was like, no, we definitely have not. So the initial idea was really to kind of keep them both in this booth, separated from each other for most of the movie. Obviously that kind of changed as we wrote it. It's hard to kind of keep that interesting for a long time. There's only so much you can do in a box. Some people have done it, but we kind of decided to kind of go a different route. And part of that was just sort of like, as we were writing it, we kind of were like, well, we want to make we're making a pandemic movie, but we also don't want to be we don't want the story to be hampered by the pandemic. So we kind of would just like push the boundaries, like with tunnels or something like that, and just wait to hear our producers say, no, you can't do that. And we had these amazing producers who never really said, no, you can't do that.
Nice.
And so, we work with these amazing people who are like, well, let's do it. So that's kind of how that formulated. And really, Tim and I had really been wanting to work with Michael Morrissey for a while. We're all really close friends, and I knew Mike really well. And so we brought him on to co-write with us. Well, technically Tim and Mike co-wrote it. So Tim brought Mike on to co-write, and I, kind of just helped with story beats and things like that.
Cool.
Hell yeah. And so I'm curious about how, we talked about the story and Satanic Panic and stuff, but then using your how much of your childhood kind of made you think about this movie and kind of inspired you to write the movie?
That's a good question. A lot of it came in how Sally talks. I I think one thing for me, like having grown up in the church and really heavily evangelical, which I mean, I'm not much anymore. I'm not very religious anymore, but I was pretty heavy into it growing up. I mean, I led worship at my church. I was the leader of my youth group. Like I was, when I say I was very evangelical, I was very evangelical as a kid. So I knew what that sounded like. And it was like really important to get that right with Sally, especially like, you know, and there's some elements of her that is a little bit of a caricature, but I also wanted her caricature. I'm sorry. But I did sort of want that to sound real, you know, and also just sort of kind of navigating through sort of the theology of this. It's kind of a mix between fantasy and theology. Like we take some creative liberties here and there with how things move, especially with our creature. But, you know, for me, it was a lot of it had to kind of navigate this real sense of what would it mean, you know, for this to actually happen. Like the idea of the rapture is this real thing that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, really informs a large section of people in this country. So, you know, kind of trying to understand, I think my background, I think really helped me get in the head of Sally a lot. Okay. And to try to make her, I think it's easy to hate her right away. And you kind of do in certain aspects, but I really wanted to make her, you know, still, you know, have some sort of empathy for her as well and understand where she's coming from.
Yeah.
And so, okay. So you talked about the rapture, Luke.
Yeah.
Let's continue with that.
Let's continue with that. With what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Well, I apologize that you guys had to suffer through this, but I did bring...
do not apologize.
A Thief in the Night, which is a 1972 Christian film. It's kind of the first, like, real, like, Christian film, I think, when they were really utilizing the medium itself for propaganda, really is what it is. And it's about the rapture. It's about a woman who wakes up and the rapture has happened, and she is missing her husband, who has been taken to heaven, and millions of other people have been taken to heaven, and she is about to go through what they call the tribulation, to get the mark of the beast. So yes, this is quite a film.
Let me read this incredible synopsis. I think this is from IMDb.
Yes,
it is from IMDb.
It's incredible. The story of Patty, a young woman caught up in living for the present with little concern for the future. She meets and marries a young man, and her life seems great until one moment she awakens to find her husband gone and the radio reporting millions of people have mysteriously disappeared. As dramatic, earth-shaking events begin to unfold around her, Patty realizes she is living in the end times, as spoken of in biblical prophecy. Adventure and suspense build to a thought-provoking climax in this powerfully gripping film.
Yeah.
Whoever wrote this is obviously a fan.
Yeah, clearly.
This is very obviously a propaganda film. It's just the most propaganda film I've seen from the Christian church. Yeah. Holy shit. But
yeah, it doesn't hold back.
So Luke, tell us why you picked this A Thief in the Night, an interesting choice.
Yeah. How did you see this film? We need to hear it all.
We need to know everything.
Well, okay, so you said traumatized. I will tell you what, as a kid, nothing traumatized me more than the idea of the rapture. I would cry myself to sleep, imagining that Jesus was just going to come and take me. And the night, like, it was the worst. It's such a weird idea in Christian theology and culture. This idea that, like, especially that they tell kids that this is a good thing, because I literally, and then you would imagine that you don't want to be taken away from the things that you know and understand, but then to be told that that's a good thing, and to be told that you then have to feel guilty for feeling that way. I mean, there's some serious stuff that you go through as a kid growing up in that culture. And the church that I grew up in was very steeped in rapture culture. We were a non-denominational church. So our brand of whatever the word is, our brand of theology was sort of, a lot of Rapture talk, a lot of, I remember we used to sing the song, which we might have to read some of the lyrics from the main song in this movie.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, we used to sing that all the time in church and talk about it. Yeah, and man, it just scared the crap out of me. I remember I was a kid and I think we were doing some sort of lock-in or something at the church where they showed us the movie. You would never have a church event that didn't have an ulterior motive. They would bring you in to play games and to eat pizza with all your friends, and it was a big camp out, and we're going to have a great time, and we're going to watch a movie, and then the movie they show you is A Thief in the Night. I mean, you cannot imagine that these young kids, and we had to have been like 7 or 8.
Oh, no.
At least, and just like scared out of our gourd. And I mean, and then they would go, so yeah, you need to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, because if you don't, you're going to be left behind. And boy, that's, everyone does it at that point. I mean, and it's just so weird because, I don't really remember doing it, but I mean, I did it over and over as a kid. There would always be these calls to salvation, and you would just do it not knowing. You'd be like, oh, what, am I really saved? I don't know. He makes a lot of sense. I'll say the prayer again for the 100th time. It's just sort of like, because it's always based on sort of this fear mongering, this sort of like threatening. This movie is so threatening.
Okay.
You think?
It is incredibly threatening. Like when I first started watching it, I turn it on, and the first thing that I am confronted with is words on the screen. Keep a sharp lookout,
Yes.
for you do not know when I will come. At evening, at midnight, early dawn, or late daybreak, don't let me find you sleeping. Jesus Christ. And that is how we're introduced.
Harry texted that to me and was like, Jesus Christ himself is threatening me right now
He's
watching
threatening
this
me.
movie. And I was like, wow, off to a roaring start.
Like, it's like you're going, wait, is he saying you're not allowed to sleep? I don't understand.
I know.
What is that? And I don't think that's from the Bible. I'm not even sure that's from the Bible. I mean, just so you know, a lot of this rapture ideology. So I studied it for a while in college when I started to kind of question a lot of my beliefs, right? That it was at the time when the whole Left Behind series was huge, and I started researching some of this stuff, and came to kind of find out that a lot of the ideas in sort of mainstream rapture theology is new. It's 20th century stuff. It's not in the Bible. It's taking things in the Bible and twisting them and making up other things, and it's kind of crazy. It's called dispensationalism, and
Yes.
it's very weird.
It's kind of funny that we're talking about this now, because a few weeks ago we chatted about The Omen, and that led me down like a rabbit hole of reading about, is it dispensationalism? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Led me down a rabbit hole of that, and one of the books that was released at the turn of 1970 that I cannot think of the name off the top of my head, that like a lot of this teaching came from, that basically said that the rapture was imminent and was going to happen sometime in either 1970s or 1980s, and the book sold millions and millions of copies and continued to sell even after the prophesized rapture was going to happen, and it obviously didn't happen. So like there was all of that. And so I talked a lot while we were watching The Omen about how I went down so many different rabbit holes about the mark of the beast, and about 666, and about the fear of barcodes, and the fear of people getting implants in their skin because that could be the mark of the beast, or that people were afraid of the barcodes on like books and stuff, that was you were like scanning the mark of the beast. And it even up to like COVID times, and people were afraid of the vaccine, that the vaccine was actually injecting the mark of the beast into your body. Yep. And there's like a lot of fear of that. And a lot of it came from the 70s in terms of some movies. I think this one probably helped a lot, as well as the book that I'm going to try to find because it blew my mind, because my family was I was never raised religious. And so I remember going to maybe a church once or twice in my entire like young kid life. And it was usually because of a a wedding or a funeral. But it was like I was never raised religious. So the idea of religion was a foreign concept to me. I knew that there was the Bible. I knew that, Jesus and there's God and all that kind of stuff. But anything else about it, went over my head until I got to high school and then met a girlfriend that I talked about in an episode with Robbie Banfitch, a director of The Outwaters. We started going down a rabbit hole about that in that conversation because she was evangelical and all of a sudden I was afraid of my eternal soul because she was telling me that if you don't get saved, you're going to go to hell, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't know anything about this. I'm like 16-year-old kid. And I'm like, what are we even talking about? And then, and we'll dig into that a bit more because this movie gave me a little bit of PTSD in terms of that.
Sorry.
But I also didn't realize that there was a difference in Christian religions until I was in my first office job. In my first office job, I was sat outside of 2 offices, and one of them was a guy who was Catholic, and one of them was a guy who was evangelical. And they would come out of their office, stand in front of my desk, and argue back and forth about a literal versus a figurative interpretation of the Bible. Jesus. And they would argue about passages in front of my desk for hours at a time. And I'm like, there's a difference in religion. I didn't know this. And so that was first time that I realized that there are people that in different sects of Christianity that do not agree on anything.
Nobody. Oh man.
Not even a little bit. I'm watching. So as everyone who's listened to this a million times knows, I was raised Catholic. I'm no longer Catholic, but have a lot of those Catholic things hammered into my brain. So I was always terrified of end of the world, 666, demons, etc., etc. But I was watching. There's this new miniseries on HBO Max called The Way Down, which is about Gwen Shamblin, who ran a religious weight loss program, and it became a cult.
Oh, interesting.
But she basically,
of course it did.
She basically made a church that didn't acknowledge the Holy Trinity, which is a thing you can do, or a thing you can do, because I guess it's just everyone's up for interpretation. And that's when I also learned that you can just kind of make your own shit up and say it's the way of the Lord, and then just proclaim your own religion.
I mean, the idea of this is something that for me led me down a path to really kind of giving up my faith. The amount of splintering that is done on a constant basis. I mean, even the church, like I said, I grew up in a town of 800 people. There was not even we didn't even have a stoplight in our town, but we had 5 churches. And at least one of them had splintered from our church. And even in our church, we had splinters. We literally there was always infighting, and there was fighting of people who were I think that we should be, singing classic hymns, and then another sect of people saying, no, we need to modernize it. We need to be singing modern worship songs. I mean, it felt like there's always fighting because people within this religious viewpoint are the most important thing is who is the most right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But, I kind of realized that, we sort of, we build our worldviews over our experiences, and our experience of the world, our experiences of people. And I started noticing that people, that I knew were changing their religious views based on their experiences. So how, not the other way around, and then using that as an excuse to justify different things. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy how much disagreement. I mean, if you study theology at all, man, it'll give you a headache pretty quick just trying to follow along. Whether is this person Calvinist or they, it's just it just goes on and on. And then on top of that, when I grew up, I had the biggest crush on this Catholic girl in my class, and I wasn't allowed to basically date her because she was Catholic and I was non-denominational, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
That's so weird.
So the book was called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. And it
Hal
is
Lindsey. Yep.
a treatment of literalist, premillennial, dispensational eschatology and compared end-time prophecies in the Bible with then-current events in an attempt to predict future scenarios resulting in the rapture of believers before the tribulation and second coming of Christ. And that was so popular. Apparently, it looks like it was featured on a primetime television special with Hal Lindsey in 1974, and then it sold up the wazoo. It was so popular that they made a film adaptation that was narrated by Orson Welles.
Oh, wow.
That was released in 1978.
Huh.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and then it continued to sell past, because I guess in the book it was saying the Antichrist was in the 70s and that the rapture was going to be in the 80s.
Yep.
And so it kind of established a lot of, from what I'm reading, a lot of the kind of principles that would continue on with the evangelical religion past the 1970s. And watching this movie it felt hand in hand with some of the stuff that I'd read about this book. And you kind of talked a little bit about the song that you were singing as a kid. And that was the second bit of and within 5 minutes of this movie, there is a band that is singing the song,
I Wish We'd All Been Ready.
I Wish We'd All Been Ready by Larry Norman, which has lyrics such as, and everyone got trampled on the floor.
Yes.
And I'm like,
which I don't know what that means.
Excuse me? I wish we'd all been ready. Children died. The days grew cold. A piece of bread could buy a bag of gold. I wish we'd all been ready. There's no time to change your mind. The sun has come and you've been left behind.
Yeah. Written by Larry Norman, who's kind of one of the first
pioneer
Christian artists.
Yeah. Christian rock music. Released over 100 albums. I went digging down his Wikipedia page. Released over 100 albums. His first album, Upon This Rock, is his first solo album, considered the first full-blown Christian rock album in 1969. It's where the song came from. And in 2008, Christian rock historian what an incredible title. Sorry.
Yeah, seriously.
I mean, in the 2000s, you could be a historian about anything pretty much anymore. But John J. Thompson wrote, "It is certainly no overstatement to say that Larry Norman is to Christian music what John Lennon is to rock and roll or Bob Dylan is to folk music." Very important guy in the kind of Christian rock pantheon. And this song is wild. It's
so twisted. It's weird because I remember singing it at church, and it's this, it's amazing. It's amazing the level of just disassociation you have to do with ideas when you're singing these things as sort of a way of praise. But the lyrics, you read the lyrics and you're just like, what is this talking about? It's twisted and scary. It's funny too. In the movie, the people that sing it are so dour and awful when they're singing it too. It's scary. It's so threatening.
Well, even before they start singing, they start with any minute, any second could be your last chance you could give yourself to Jesus. This is no joke. This is not a fairy tale. It will happen just as sure as you are here right now. And then they launch into this song, and it's this is your introduction to the movie. After, of course, we get in media res with Patty, our heroine, who wakes up to find that her husband is gone and his razor is going bzzz in the bathroom. She walks in and we get this amazing camera zoom to her face that just sort of whoomp up to her face, and then the scream as she realizes she's been left behind.
The editing in this movie is absolutely fucking incredible, because at one point a man is bitten by a cobra. And he's starting to scream, and then the ambulance. I'm like, okay, look, I know this is a propaganda film, but this editing is incredible. Chef's kiss editing. I bet he's bitten by a cobra, and then smash cut to the ambulance. It's so good. Yeah. It's so good.
There's so many moments like that, and you're just like, what?
And you're
what's the one with the there's a cricket or a bug or something? I'm trying to remember. Am I thinking of the right thing where they hit? Is it the helicopter and it becomes like a cricket on a door or something like that?
Yes. The helicopter. Yes.
Well, even what I love is after this song, we're introduced to our three female leads who represent different trains of thought. You have Diane, the secular thinker, who's like, I thought that was a whole bunch of bull. You have Patty, the and I'm using quotation marks here, the fake Christian, because she hasn't been saved. And she's like, I'm a Christian. Well, not like the band leader was a Christian. I go to church. I follow the 10 Commandments. I read the Bible once in a while. What else is there? And then you have Jenny, the questioning, do I need to be saved? And then she ultimately, becomes saved. But you have like these three ideals, and those are the people that we follow through the rest of the movie. But there is a moment where Jenny goes back to the band and is talking to them, and she accepts Christ into her heart.
Oh my God.
And this woman who is like an automaton is like saying, yes, Jenny, all you need to do is give up your life to God.
So scary.
It's so great. You will know true love at this point. And she's like, she says, if I had wings, I could fly. And she's like, but you don't need wings now, Jenny. And the editing again cuts to her friends who are not being saved, flying off in a metal object in the sky, as if we're like saying, shame on them for trying to fly and spite God, because now you, with God in you, can fly, and they have to use a machine. Like that, the editing is so perfect in this movie.
I feel like they got someone who knew what they were doing and were like, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to do what I can here. Again, in my mind, and like my perfect little image of what this is, it was some poor dude who was like, I just need the money, so I'm just gonna fuck around and find out.
I would really like to know more about the actors and the production of this movie. And I mean, we know it was shot in Des Moines, Iowa, right?
It was shot in Des Moines, Iowa.
I know a special thanks and the credit go out to Century 21 Incorporated, which I was trying to figure out where that shows up in the movie. But I honestly, at like that point, you're sort of like, wait, is Jenny the main character? Is it Jenny? Yeah. I couldn't quite. Let me say one thing about this movie. It's very hard to follow.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, because I was like, this is only an hour and 8 minutes long, and all of these women look almost identical, and I do not fucking remember who is who and who has been saved by Jesus and who is...
I took copious notes.
I
was like...
God bless you. Oh, man. It requires precision attention,
because the timelines
to figure out where
around, and everyone's like a blonde woman in the same outfit, and I'm just like, huh?
Yep.
So it is hard to follow.
I love that a lot of the tension in this film is almost of a like, when is the rapture gonna happen? So there's like all these like moments of like,
it's true.
I was sitting here going, okay, so this movie is very short. We're like 30 minutes into it. This movie is just over an hour. And I was like, okay, so we have the snake, the guy that is getting a blood transfusion because he was bitten by a snake. And I'm like, is it going to happen now? Is this when things are going to happen? And it's like, look what could happen. And the doctor is like gone and he's like dying. Like, this is what I'm thinking. Like, when is it going to happen? There's all these little moments where it's like something dramatic is happening. I'm like, oh, is it going to happen now? Is it going to happen now? And then it happens in the most like inobtrusive like manner. It's just like, it just sort of happens. But I just, a lot of the tension is that waiting for, when are they gonna all disappear?
Well, there's so the guy. Okay, so there's Jim, right? And Jim gets bitten. So well, let's back up for a second, because like this really interesting thing that where Jim, my favorite line in the movie is the one where they go, who is it that says it? But is it maybe Patty? But she says something like, oh, he doesn't work at the zoo. He works in the zoo. It's like, what? What does that mean? I don't understand.
I mean, because he's a vet, right? And then Jerry is a doctor, and I don't even know if he's a doctor. He works.
It's so hard to know. It's so hard to know.
But like, oh, he's a pre-med student. I did take that note. And the comment is like, we got us both a couple of doctors.
Yes. So he's okay. So Jim is a friend, and he's working at the zoo, I guess.
In the zoo.
I'm like, first of all, I was like, how did they get a cobra? Like, that's quite an animal wrangling.
It really is.
Situation for a low budget film to have a cobra. That's impressive. And he gets bit by this loose cobra at the zoo that I don't know why he was loose, but you kind of there was around this moment where I literally, so I watched it with my friend John, and I was like, I was like, wait, is this all a flashback? Like, even up until this point, I didn't even realize that we had flashed back. Like, the timeline is just so weird that you can't quite follow it exactly. So, and then you sort of figure out, okay, I see what's happening. And then Jenny, the new Christian, prays for him. Mm-hmm. And you almost think that, like, is Jenny the protagonist of this film? Because it focuses on Jenny for quite a while, and then they, like, go to church together, and you're like, oh, is, like, Jim and Jenny gonna get together? But then in your brain you go, but wait, didn't Patty yell out for Jim in the beginning, right? So, clearly Jim and Patty are together. And you're just like, where is this movie going?
Yep.
The movie's confused, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the parts that kind of got to me, if get to me is the right word to use here, is when the little girl who's like, you're not going anywhere, right, mommy? Or like, you're not going anywhere. Because I'm like, okay, so this is definitely like me as a child being like, I've heard of the rapture one time, so now I'm going to be terrified that no matter what happens, my mom is going to disappear. And then the girl disappears getting the butter from the neighbor. And it's like, it's a rather harrowing, it's a rather harrowing moment. Like, if you think about it outside of the propaganda of it all, she's got her little puppet and is just walking over to borrow a stick of butter from her neighbor. And then all of a sudden, and you see like a neighbor come out with no shirt and his lawnmower and is like wheeling it around. And then you flash to a melting stick of butter in the driveway. And I'm like, oh, that's actually okay. I can appreciate that kind of the way that you've set this up with having the little girl be scared, and she in fact disappears, and then you go to the flashes of like the mixer overbeating, and then you have the razor in the sink, and now you're like, oh, okay, now I understand where we are in the chronology of the events going on here.
Yeah. Once the rapture happens, the movie starts to actually get somewhat movie-ish. Like before that, it's just a lot of preaching. Like, it's a lot of preaching. There's two full actual sermons in this movie before you even get to the rapture.
But what's interesting about them is that, again, they're like these characters portraying like the secular, the fake, and I'm using again quotations, Christian, and then the real Christian that was saved. This, like, that dichotomy right there, they use two different preachers, one to preach a sermon of like, oh, the Bible is just full of poetry and poems, and as long as you are good, that's all God cares about. And then you have the fire and brimstone, though the rapture is going to happen one. Right. And of course, the one that is talking about how the figurative interpretation, or like the Catholic, or like the non-evangelical view of the Bible, he eventually becomes like, oh my God, I led my flock astray. He becomes like a villain in a sense, because he did not preach the true word to his people, and therefore he is being tormented for it.
Well, you're like listening to his sermon and you're like, oh, this guy's actually making, like, I can dig this, right? Like, he's actually making some sense. It's not so bad. And then you're like, and then you find out later, oh no, he's a bad guy? I was like,
and then he ends up getting shot in the head.
Yeah. Oh God. Yes.
He's also played by Russell S. Doughton, who is the producer of the film. And also wrote the story of the film. And interestingly enough, he got his start as a producer for The Blob, the original 1958 The Blob. There is actually a lot of Christian people involved with the making of The Blob. The score was written by someone that was involved with is it Lindsey Graham? Was that him? But like, there was like a composer that was involved. There was like someone else that was involved. But so Doughton got his start with The Blob. He went to Hollywood, got disillusioned, moved back to Des Moines, Iowa, and started his production companies and started pumping out, religious films, of which A Thief in the Night is the first in a 4-movie trilogy or series.
Yes.
What?
So. Yeah, so, and apparently, I mean, really, by the time you get to the 4th movie in this series, there's like mutants.
Mutants?
Yeah. It's like on the one hand, I'm like, I don't know if I can take any more of this, but on the other hand, I really want to see the mutants.
I was watching this with my roommate, and we were like both like just sitting like going, "What are we watching?" And then after she's like, "Did you know there's 3 more movies?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "I kind of want to watch them."
Yeah, we watched the trailers, and it's interesting because that as they go, you can tell that they become more movie-ish. And when I say movie-ish, I for the listeners out there, this movie is people trying. It feels like someone trying to figure out how to make a movie. It's very weird and not polished in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, you can kind of tell that the quality slightly improves as they go along. Not that it makes it any more watchable, I don't think, but yeah.
But I love that there are 3 enemies in this. So you have like the fake minister, right? And then you also have the United Nations.
Yes. Oh my God. The United Nations.
Who make United Nations Imperium of Total Emergency, who want to start IDing people with binary code that, of course, is the number 666, the mark of the beast. And I was like, wow. So do we hate the UN? Is like I was like, why? What is going on here?
No, I remember as a kid. I mean, the UN was really. I mean, they were an enemy. They were the enemy.
Wow.
There was this. They were so like growing up in evangelical culture, people are constantly looking for signs of the end times.
Yeah.
Oh, this means we're in the end times. Oh, this means we're in the end times. And the UN was a big one. It was this sort of, one world order type idea. Oh, and I think, there is a straight line from this movie and the impact that this movie had, because it was very successful in terms of what it set out to do. Mm-hmm. But there's a straight line from this movie to where we are now in a lot of political discourse and some things that, we're dealing with. Is just sort of this, people being scared of globalism and things like that. A lot of that comes out of this idea. And a lot of, and those ideas come from people like Hal Lindsey, and sort of, trying to, because he was, especially as you mentioned, someone who would try to point out things in the culture and in world events that would signal, the coming of Christ, the second coming of Christ.
Well, I will say that I was watching this now because, again, this was the first time I'd ever heard of this movie. It's the first time I've ever obviously seen this movie. No, it was quite a watch. But what kind of was the most chilling aspect of it was seeing some of the language that's used in it that is used now in terms of like people being anti-vax. So like you have like, because the whole idea is once the United Nations gets involved and create Unite, and they're going to ID everyone. Again, this goes back to the mark of the beast and that kind of thing that they're marking people for that. But the language of what's going on, there's an old man that comes into the ID facility and is like, I'm not afraid of being a good citizen. And he gets tattooed with the mark of the beast. And so the implication here that like good citizen means that you are following in with this group that is going to lead to your downfall. There is the reports where the guy that works at the UN is shouting, report today to your local Unite Identification Center and show yourself a true citizen. That kind of language in terms, if you were to just say like, instead of Unite Identification Center, say like, go to your vaccination place and get yourself a vaccine. The Imperium in no way wants to impinge on the rights of citizens of the world. It's just simple necessity that each of us identify with Unite and fully support its progress and strategy. Again, you put vaccine in there in COVID talks. It makes sense. Those who refuse to ID are working against the goals of the purposes of the Imperium. Those who don't have the mark of Unite will be arrested. You have that, and you have like this fear of people not getting the injected, that they're going to be forced to take this that kind of aspect. And you can see sort of like the rationalization and the circuitous thought that kind of, I feel, is why a lot of people were anti-COVID and anti-barcodes and everything that kind of like that.
But it also reminded me of Nazi imagery too, because you have these people having to get marked, obviously with this tattoo that's permanent, and it has to be either on your hand or on your forehead. And then at one point there's a woman who has a red armband walking through a prison, And so there's like this very much, and I obviously like with like the 666 stuff goes hand in hand with that kind of Nazi imagery. But I was like, wait, so we're calling the UN Nazis now, and like we are not kind of mincing any words here about like who is the bad guy and who is like an evil dick. It was just very, very shocking to see them go for that big of a stretch. I think the armband really solidified it, because with the tattoo, I was like, okay. But then the armband, I thought, okay, what in the fuck are we doing here?
But can I just say that I kept going like, why is the forehead an option? Like what?
I know.
Like it's like
forehead or hand, and she's like, is it permanent? I was like, why was that even?
What? Like, why would you choose your forehead? There's like an old guy who goes, "Oh, I'm a good citizen. I'll do it on my forehead." I'm just like, why? Why is that even an option? The back of the hand or the forehead are not the only options you have here.
I guess so it's obvious. Oh, and I absolutely love like the very quick zoom where it's like she escapes, and then it's revealed that one of the women and her husband are now have marked of the beast, and he like has a walkie-talkie, and he's like coming to get her. And they zoom on the mark on his hand. I was like,
that was the best part of the movie, because it's so Diane and Jerry. It is her friends.
Exactly.
And they turn on her.
It's so
and it's like, oh, no, you bitch.
Like also his character cracked me up the whole time with his weird facial hair and voice. Like his whole character, I was like, I know that you're supposed to, you are already coded as a bad guy.
Oh, like, sir, you are way too old to be like hitting on these young girls. Like, sir.
Yes. But I kept wondering like why. Like what? Okay, so like you have to have the mark of the beast to like get groceries or anything like that, and like she's kind of resisting, and I'm thinking, you know, why resist now? You've had to get a driver's license. You're a citizen of America. Like what? All of a sudden, like someone telling you to be a citizen to do one other license is the issue here, and on top of that, like what's or else what? Like why are you like it? Like it made me badly want to research what some of the Rapture mentality is of like, is there like a second chance that you're going to get? Like, why are we resisting all of a sudden? Like, aren't you already screwed? Like, it's very unclear about why we are resisting at all.
Yeah, because like if it's the Rapture already happened, then everyone's already kind of like, you're the ones left over.
Yeah, you lost your chance.
You're left over, so like, you don't really need to mark. Yeah, I was like, what's the mythology? What's the lore here?
What are the rules
What
here?
are the rules of the
explain?
Rapture? Please explain to me the exact rules of why we have to be tattooed for the ones that lived through the Rapture.
Yeah, well, and I will tell you, I remember I remember that when I first started dating my wife, and she wasn't religious, and so, you know, I was still pretty evangelical, and so there was a big deal about her coming and sort of learning all this stuff. And so when we were I met my wife in high school, and she would come to church, she'd come to youth group with me.
Oh, wait, that's so cool of her.
It was cool of her. I feel bad now that she had to go through such a terrible thing, but we came out okay. You know, I remember Left Behind was really big, and she started reading it, and she started kind of researching. I think she just sort of got into the mythology, if you will, of the Rapture theology. And there's like these timelines of everything that's going to happen, like these different eras of the Rapture. You have pre-tribulation and then tribulation, and then also, like, if you look at this stuff, it's extremely confusing. Mm-hmm. And all the stuff that's like supposed to happen after the Rapture is nuts. I mean, and it goes deep. I mean, it's a little crazy how detailed this thing gets.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I got a PTSD moment from this, and when I was closeted in high school, I had a girlfriend for a very brief amount of time. Listeners, I'm not going to rehash all of it, but if you want to know about it, go listen to our episode with Robbie Banfitch about the Changeling, where we got derailed in our conversation because of this. But this was my first like interaction with like I would say more intimate interaction with like religion, because before that I did not really know much about religion, because my parents never raised us to be religious, although they would say that they were Lutheran, and my dad was Methodist, but like they never really explained it. I never went to church, so I meet her, and she like got really big into evangelicalism, and what's the word?
Evangelism?
I keep saying it. Evangelism?
Is it evangelism?
Yeah, no, evangelism isn't.
No, that's different.
I don't think so.
Nope.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Well, she got very big
into
evangelicalism.
That.
Yeah, she got real big into that with her whole family. And the language, so she became very convinced that she had to save my soul. Mm-hmm. And the language that was used in this movie just brought me back to conversations that we would have where she would say, it could happen at any moment. You need to give yourself to God because it literally could happen right now, and you're going to go to hell. And she's like, and I don't want you to go to hell because I care about you. Yep.
Wow, thanks so much.
And then the track would turn, and again, this is a line from the movie where someone tells, I can't remember, I think it might be Jenny, you have everything to gain and absolutely nothing to lose. And that was another thing that she would say. She's like, okay, but she would try to, use logic. Okay, so if you give yourself up to God and it's true, then you're going to go to heaven. And if it's false, you haven't lost anything. And so there was that kind of conversation that was like trying to dig into like the more logical aspect of me, because I was very skeptical and I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Mm-hmm. And then there was also the disconnect where she would talk about how you're going to get punished and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, but everyone talks about how God is love. And again, clueless on this. And I'm like, so if God is love, then why is this going to happen? And she's like, well, God punishes sin. And that became like this whole kind of like thing for me, because again, deeply closeted, and one of the things was that gay people were going to go to hell. And I had a friend who had just recently come out, and so I started to like think, instead of thinking about myself, would think about him and be like, okay, well, if he's going to go to hell and he doesn't know, then oh my gosh, should he be saved? And really I was talking about myself, but I was like kind of trying to isolate that because I didn't want to think of myself as gay at the time. And so I was like putting it off on someone else, like saying he needs to be saved because, like she said, what if it is real? And so it was like this whole like thing where it was like this trauma in me of like, wow, I don't believe any of this, but also I don't want to burn in hell. Yeah. And also like, I'm gay, and what does that mean? Because like some people would say, love the sinner, hate the sin, but some people would say, no, if you're gay, you can like get out of it. And that became like this whole other thing that was like really confusing to me as I was trying to figure out my own sexuality. And also I had this girlfriend who was trying to convince me that I needed to be saved in it. So watching this movie and seeing all the kind of like circular logic that was happening in this film and the conversations that were happening just brought me back to that time with my girlfriend.
Oh man. I know all of that so well. In fact, I remember, I think when I was in high school, I think the first real big crack in my faith journey was, we had this, the leaders in our youth group had a field trip. Mm-hmm. We were taken to this big conference, and it was an evangelical conference. And the whole point was, it was basically teaching, we were in high school at the moment, kids how to save people. Yeah. That was it. It was like a 3 or 4 day thing. And I remember we did all these things. We would go into the inner cities of Chicago and go up to people on the street and try to save them on the street. And I'm like maybe 15, 16, right? 17, something like that. Really young. And this is a lot. And like, I remember one of the things we had to do was we had to write letters to all our unsaved friends.
I got a letter
at home. Oh, I remember.
Holy shit, guys.
It was like, even doing it, even though I believed at the time, it was almost traumatizing to do it because you were sort of being forced to do something that just, that was the moment I can trace back that moment of going, this isn't right. And I remember we were supposed to give our letters to our leader, and I threw mine in the trash. I was like, I can't do this. I just can't do it. And I think it was sort of, I think like a few months after that, I quit my youth group. I stopped going. And, you know, I remember how it just, you know, I had been saying all the things that were said to you. I remember saying I said it to my wife. I remember having conversations. I would say these things to my wife. And like, there's a point at which you go, you know, you get old enough and you start to think through these, you know, this circular logic, and it just doesn't make any sense. And you go, I don't think I can do this anymore. And now watching, it's so interesting because watching the movie kind of brought me back to a lot of the stuff. And you watch it on the other side and you're just like, it's amazing that this works. Yeah. Because it is so threatening and is so nefarious almost, and how the manipulation of it is, you know, it is A Thief in the Night a horror movie? I think it is, just in the way people talk, right?
Like, it's scary. Like, if you watching it, and I'm like, you know, I was laughing at it, but at the same time, I was like, this is scary shit, because when you like really do believe in it, like when you are a religious person and you believe in this, like it is a horror movie. Like this is like your worst nightmare, Yep. I mean, it's not a good movie, but I think it's effective for what it was trying to do. I mean, it terrified you as a kid, and I think it was probably scarily effective, even if the production value isn't great. I mean, it didn't matter to them, I bet. It was just like, well, if we can just tap into that anxiety and get people terrified, that's all that matters. And that is scarier than anything in my head.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it taught people a certain kind of manipulation. How to, like you said, it taught people how to approach people in a certain way, and that's scary, you know. And I think, you know, it's still being done today. It's still being, you know, taught, and people talk like that still, and you know, that's kind of frightening in and of itself. So,
well, that was the thing that like really jumped out at me, because again, like I said, the language that was being used in this film that was from 1972 is the same exact language that my girlfriend was using in would have been, I guess, 96. Yeah, probably 96, 97 time frame. Yep. Is the same, literally, like lines like I was writing is like, I remember her almost, she could have been reciting this movie to me and I would not be surprised. Like how on the nose a lot of the conversation was. And I'm just like, this is, it kind of like gave me like goosebumps as I was listening to it. Cause I had, as I mentioned when we talked to Robbie, a lot of this I had kind of, I don't know, blocked away, like it was like in subconscious. And then when we started talking, the reason we talked about it then is because she introduced me to the Changeling. Her family introduced me to the Changeling. And then that like started to, it really is. But like that led me down talking about that movie and watching it again for the first time since probably around that time was like bringing back all his memories. And then watching this was like, oh shit, she used to say the same shit to me. And it was like just this wild, like, sense of deja vu happening. It's just
wow,
this movie.
Well, I apologize for triggering. I really
Scarred
do.
for life, living up to its name.
Yes.
Well, do we want to wrap up and give this our rating out of 5?
Yes. So before we do, though, now that you've rewatched this as an adult, this movie's still scary to you?
It is still scary to me, for different reasons. It's scary, like we talked about. I think it's scary because it's as I was watching it, I kept thinking, I'm sad that people do this, right? Like, it's like the idea of having certain characters in the film feeling compelled to, you know, essentially convince someone by using these fear tactics. And that's all that is, just fear tactics. It makes me sad. It makes me sad, you know, because even the people that are doing it, I mean, I remember being they're doing it from a place of love, right? They're doing it, you know, even your girlfriend at the time, you know, you can't deny that she was actually concerned. Yeah. But it's the brainwashing of how you get to that point, how you get to that concern, which I think just really, you know, it makes me sad. It makes me sad that that's a part of culture, that's a part of that whole thing. When, listen, I think that something can be said about certain elements of religion that are good, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the parts of the Bible that say we, you know, like Jesus says 1,000 times, we should be taking care of the poor, and we should be taking care of, you know, widows and orphans, and you know, on and on. Like, those are kind of the important parts, but there's a culture that focuses on this manipulation, and sort of seeing that manifest in this movie to such a paranoid degree and such a nefarious degree. I think, like I said, it's scary, very scary still, I think.
Yeah, holy shit.
Whew, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Don't mean to be such a downer.
it's true though. Terry, you get the fun task of being the first one to rate this movie. How many marks of the beast out of 5 do you give A Thief in the Night?
I feel like I need to give it 666, but no. I mean, okay, let's be honest. It's not a very good movie. Like,
no.
as we've said, even if you were to strip the religious connotations out of it, it's just not a very well made movie. It doesn't make the pacing of it doesn't make any sense. The in media res, and I was like, for a moment there, I was like, I really thought that we were following people after the rapture already happened. I'm like, why are they singing about the rapture? It already just happened in the opening scene. And then that's like the kind of wraparound bit where we're back to there and she wakes up and it's a dream, but then it's not a dream. I'm just like, this movie is confused. There's a lot of confusion going on here.
Totally. I
did think it was, for what it was trying to do, it was incredibly effective. And like I said, it gave me chills with some of the dialogue that it gets repeated in real life. But honestly, it's not a good movie, and I'm just gonna have to give it 1 marks out of the beast out of 5 for me. But what about you, Mary Beth?
Yeah, I'm waffling here because I'm like, what do I judge this movie on? Because it's like, okay, obviously not well made, like insane, not like it's ridiculous. But then, and it's also like insane propaganda, and you're like, this is incredibly ridiculous. But then on the other hand, I'm like, what a fascinatingly horrifying cultural object to have, and like evidence of Christian, whatever we're called, I don't even fucking know, because it's like whatever Christian something ideologies and how it's being fed to people and how it is terrifying and how that rhetoric went on for, and you, like you were saying, Terry, with COVID, like that kind of rhetoric is still kind of going on. Like, even though this was made in the 70s, like this is not necessarily old news or like kind of old fashioned way of thinking.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know. I'm gonna be really generous here and give it 2, which I know sounds crazy, but I think it's a fascinating cultural object and like a weird thing that exists that I think is weirdly important to kind of look at how movies are used and what horror movies can look like in a different kind of context. Like, I was actually, you brought this, Luke, and I was like, this is such a weird choice, but I'm so excited to talk about it, and I'm glad we did. Like, I don't know, I just think it's a really cool way of looking at fear in a much different perspective. And I am weirdly fascinated. And so I am going to just go out and live and be brave and say 2, just because of how wild and kind of truly scary it is as a concept that it exists as a movie.
You know, I really do want to watch the sequels, and I kind of want to get friends together and get like blitzed and just drink a whole lot and watch these movies, because it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I did tell my friend, I really wish that there were some riff tracks you could at least throw on these or something, because man, there's some good stuff there.
Yeah, Luke.
Yeah, that's
the final word. But we'll go into that. Like, what is your rating of this movie? Your mark of how many marks of the beast?
Yeah, you both make really good points. Gosh, I don't know. I think, you know, I would lean towards 1, but Mary Beth, I think you make some excellent points just about the effectiveness of it. And, you know, it's funny because I think really a lot. I worked in a Christian bookstore for a while when I was going to college. And I remember a lot of the Christian movies sort of have these horror elements in them because they are so steeped in fear tactics, you know? And so, but this one's kind of this is sort of the big bang of that, and even not even just like sort of the theology element. It's actually kind of the big bang of sort of a separate Christian marketplace, like of Christian consumerism. And that's a whole other topic we could get onto. Having worked in a Christian bookstore, man, I could tell you about the ideas behind Christian consumerism. So I'll go with you on a 2. I think that you have a fair point about, where this stands from I guess a academic perspective, if you will. So yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you were talking about horror and kind of like Christianity and horror and that kind of like intermingling there. And I just remembered that my girlfriend had wanted me to go to Hell House that her church had put on, I think is what it was called.
Oh boy.
Instead of like a haunted house, they do like Hell House.
Yeah.
I didn't go, but I remember her
did you
really
go?
trying to get me to go. Yeah, I have so many questions about the whole the working in the Christian bookstore and that kind of stuff. Because I remember walking into one because she wanted to buy some CD from some Christian rock band. I don't remember what it was. I don't remember who it was, but I just remember walking in that store and it was like entering a different world for me. I just remember that.
It is crazy. Yes.
That's so funny. I was just talking to Steve about how all like some of the pop punk bands I used to listen to when I was in high school are actually Christian rock bands. Like they had like secret Jesus messaging in them, and I'm like,
crossovers. I know.
Fuck? Anyway,
I also started thinking about the movie Saved while watching this movie.
Saved. I love
that's
that
a
movie
great
so much. Oh, I love that.
It's
movie.
really that's a good one. Yeah.
Because like I literally at one point when I was watching this with my roommate, I shouted, "I am filled with Christ's love," because that is my favorite line from Saved, and I just Wow. Well, thank you so much, Luke, for joining us to talk about A Thief in the Night and bringing this into my radar. I had a lot of fun. So where can our listeners find you? And there's Tiramisu, and Mary Beth's cat has stuff to say.
She's been screaming in the background for like 20 minutes trying to get in, and we let her in, and now she's being a bitch. Sorry.
Your cat's name is Tiramisu?
Yes.
Oh my god, that's the best cat name. Oh my god, I can't.
She's adorable. I love her.
But yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so where can the listeners find you? And is Revealer going to be playing at other festivals they can see, or what's coming up next for you?
Okay, so Revealer is going to be at Underworlds Festival in Austin, Texas, on May 21st. And Kato and Shayna will be there for that. We're really excited about that. And then everyone will be able to see the film on June 23rd on Shudder. We'll release on Shudder, so we're really excited about that.
Sweet.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
and
so cool.
I am available on Twitter at Luke's Lens, and usually I think Instagram and other places under the same handle.
Cool.
Sweet.
So, listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. Have you seen A Thief in the Night? Have you even heard of A Thief in the Night? I would love to know who else out there has experienced this movie. You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MBMcAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And, of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there. But most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Oh, somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room, Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.